So to help us dive into this issue, we are joined by David Hundeyin, the investigative journalist who was responsible for breaking this story. His work has shed light on the critical situation surrounding Pidom and the risk faced by whistleblowers in Nigeria.
Well, David, I want to say thank you so much for joining us today. And let me start by asking that since you broke the story with other pressures, and with the other pressures, especially with the police finally admitting to having Pidom in custody. But before we go into that and the press release, for the sake of anyone just getting to know the story, may not know who Pidom is and all of that, how did the information about his disappearance come to you?
Okay, so first of all, for those who don't know Pidom, he is an anonymous whistleblower, primarily using Twitter, who gets information from up to and including the highest levels of government and puts them out to the public in the interest of the public. So the name Pidom is an acronym that actually stands for people in distress or missing. Right. So because that was how the handle got started. It started as a sort of counter effort to people who were getting kidnapped. So it was like a sort of one man's effort to try and sort out these problems. Now, sometime on Thursday morning, which is 3 days ago now, I checked my Twitter account, as I often do, and I saw a message from this handle. Bearing in mind that I hadn't spoken to this guy in a couple of weeks. We had a bit of a fallout, but that's a story for another day. So I saw a message from him, and I opened the message, and the message said, actually, this isn't Pidom. And it was someone claiming to be someone close to him. And supposedly, this person said that the instruction from Pidom was to hand over the Twitter account to me, that Pidom apparently had been arrested in Port Harcourt and had been transferred to the Force Criminal Investigation Department in Abuja under the auspices of the National Cybercrime Center of the Nigerian Police Force. And supposedly, Pidom's instructions were that this account should be handed over to me and that I should keep on I should use the account and basically impersonate him, pretend to be him, and that in doing so, that would somehow create an alibi for him, which would sort of get him off. And the evidence that was provided for this was an administrative bail sheet. And supposedly the instruction was log into his account, start tweeting in his voice, act as if everything is all right, and somehow that will be used as an alibi with the Nigerian Police Force. Now, obviously, being that I wasn't born yesterday, I immediately smelled a rat. Because first of all, I took a look at the administrative bail sheet. The surety that was demanded was either a federal civil servant, a level 16 civil servant, with a property worth 500 million naira, which is mathematically impossible for a level 16 civil servant to own legally, or a private business person with property worth 500 million naira in the FCT, who would then have to drop their tax clearance certificate, their CAC certificate, and it's basically an impossible set of bail conditions, right? They had no intention of letting this person go. Bearing in mind that 500 million naira is 200 million naira more than the bail amount that was set for Godwin Emefiele, the former CBN governor. So clearly there was no intention to let this person go. And I instantly suspected that I was speaking to an intelligence operative or at the very least someone working for the government pretending to be close to Pidom. So the instruction from this person was, do not go public with this under any circumstances. Keep this hush hush, pretend to be him. And then the person sent me login details, which kept failing, but eventually he or she sent me a login detail which actually worked, and I actually gained access to Pidom's account. So immediately I gained access to the account, I immediately changed the account password and two-factor authentication so that only I had access to it. So I basically locked everybody else out of the account who might have been logged into the account. And then as soon as that happened, all of my, well, not all, but most of my personal accounts and devices started having security problems. Someone started trying to hack into my WhatsApp. Someone started trying to hack into my Telegram. I don't know how many attempts were made to hack into my Twitter. A sort of very suspicious two-factor authentication code was sent to my WhatsApp, which I was later informed could potentially be something called a zero-click exploit. A zero-click exploit is a type of malware which is sent to your phone, which you don't actually have to click on or open, which is why it's called a zero-click exploit, which is a very expensive thing to do, by the way. And as far as I'm aware, only state-level actors have access to that sort of a spyware, which is sold by Israeli groups like NSO Group. As a result of that, I've actually had to replace most of my devices between Thursday and today due to security concerns. So I decided that the only thing that makes sense to do in this situation is to go public with it, because based on the fact that whoever this person is that I was speaking to has given me access to Pidom's account, so I know for a fact that Pidom cannot be safe. Something has to be going on here. So I went public with it. I put all this information out on my Substack, which goes out to, I think, 50,000 subscribers or so. And yeah, the very next day, bear in mind that this is someone who was supposedly taken in on the 5th of August. So that's more than 2.5 weeks now. The very next day, when this story started going everywhere, it became a national story. Then the police, for the first time, came out and acknowledged that they actually supposedly have this person in custody who they suspect of being Pidom after 2.5 weeks. Bear in mind that under Nigerian law, you're not supposed to be detained for more than 48 hours without charge.
Okay.
2.5 weeks without sitting in front of a judge. Finally, they acknowledged it, and then they rushed out a statement saying that they're going to take him to court next week, which we don't
David, if you don't mind, David, you've said a couple of things I wanted to get confirmation on. First of all, you're telling that they also tried to hack into your account. Do you feel that you were being sucked into this whole mix as well, perhaps? Is that what you feel?
Yes, in multiple ways. First of all, if you are trying to log into a Twitter account or a Gmail account, whoever is currently logged into that account can see the location of any attempted logins. So it could be, first of all, that someone was trying to get hold of my location, first of all. And then secondly, the instruction to log into the account of a missing person and pretend to be them. If I had done that, if I'd been foolish enough to do that, that could well have been a successful attempt to rope me into some sort of criminal case, potentially with the international ramifications.
Another thing is, at this time, Pidom, well, you hadn't identified exactly where Pidom was, so he's still missing at this time. But now that the police has come out to tell exactly that they have arrested him, have they indicated exactly why he was arrested in the first place?
What crimes did he commit?
Or the crimes that he committed?
So the force spokesperson, Muyiwa Adejobi, released a statement yesterday where he claimed, amongst other things, that this person was arrested for involvement in subversive activity, whatever that might mean. In fact, let me read out the statement. So it says, in a well-coordinated effort, officials from the Nigeria Police Force National Cybercrime Center apprehended Bristol Isaac Tamuno B. Efiri, also known as Pidom, on allegations of committing serious offenses that undermine the integrity of government operations. There are several allegations leveled against the suspect, including unlawful possession, leakage of classified documents, cyber-related offenses, and others. So essentially what he's being accused of is being a whistleblower, because that's what whistleblowers do. They get hold of classified information and release them to the public.
Now that that's identified, they also released a picture. Now, you mentioned that Pidom is, until now, anonymous. Can you confirm who this person was, this picture that was released? Would you like to confirm if this is Pidom or not?
It's impossible for me to say, because the kind of relationship we had never involved him sharing such information with me. So he never shared his government name with me, never shared his photograph, never shared his address, his actual physical location, he never shared his family situation. So we were friends on the internet, and we're friends by virtue of the connectedness of the work that we do, and we collaborated a number of times. But so it will be impossible for me to say that this is or is not Pidom.
All right, thank you so much for that confirmation. I understand that yourself and certain persons put out a press statement. Can you take us through some of the main points or the pinpoints of that statement, please?
So the first was to push back on the narrative being promoted by Muyiwa Adejobi that somehow this person has committed serious offenses. By first of all pointing out that the police, in fact, has committed a serious offense here by abducting a, an unarmed civilian, a Nigerian citizen, because that wasn't an arrest, that was an abduction. If it was an arrest, first of all, the manner of its execution would have been very different. Apparently, there were more than 15 fully armed men dressed in mufti, right? They weren't wearing uniform, who burst in like armed robbers, and first of all, thoroughly beat this person up, and then took him in, and then before he was transferred to Abuja, first of all. Secondly, upon being transferred to FCID in Abuja, he was kept in solitary confinement for 6 days, handcuffed for 6 days without food for 6 days. Bear in mind that under international law, using starvation as a punishment is actually classed as a war crime. It's classed as a crime against humanity. The Nigerian police force did that to someone whose parent crime was being a whistleblower, which, by the way, is actually not a crime in Nigeria. Then we also pushed back on the narrative that somehow the activities that this person was apparently arrested for required this level of priority, because I pointed out, for example, that the actions of the Nigerian police force, amongst other things, which led to the most recent round of protests in the country, the End Bad Governance protests, have not been addressed by the police. The lack of professionalism within the police has not been addressed. Those are far bigger priorities than going after some, anonymous whistleblower somewhere, allegedly. And then we also pointed out that technically or supposedly, Nigeria is supposed to be a country under law. Nigeria purports to be a democracy. And in a democracy, and in a country under law, there are certain processes for doing things. So if someone is being accused of these things, most of which, by the way, are civil offenses, right? Because if the statement from the police is saying that there are petitions that have been submitted by several people, these are civil matters, right? You are supposed to invite the person to come into the to speak to the police. You don't carry out this sort of Gestapo operation, using all manner of secret technology and whatnot to locate and track someone who supposedly is this person, and then sort of do this sort of rendition across state lines from Port Harcourt to Abuja. As far as I'm aware, there is very little basis for that under Nigerian law, but apparently the Nigerian police is sort of a law unto itself. And then finally, we pointed out that we shouldn't even be talking about a trial or being arraigned in front of a judge or anything like that, because the manner of his arrest in the first place, or rather the manner of his abduction, negates any purported basis for there being some sort of recourse to the law, because the actions of the police were illegal to begin with. We cannot build legality on top of illegality if we claim to be a country under law. In other words, he must be released immediately, and we shouldn't even be talking about a court or a court date, because the very process through which this thing was initiated was illegal.
All right. I must also ask about, first of all, to speak to the conditions of Pidom and his arrest. Do you know where he's being held and what his condition is like?
So as at Friday afternoon, we had eyes on him. We had a team member who visually sighted him and confirmed that he was alive and well. Maybe well would be overstating it, but he was definitely alive. But in doing so, it also became very clear that this person has suffered torture over the past 2.5 weeks. There are marks all over his body. He looks physically emaciated because clearly he's not been eating well, if at all. Bear in mind that for the first 6 days he was starved. And since then, the condition has not much improved. In fact, one of the major things that the intervention team on ground in Abuja has been doing is getting food across to him, because he's actually apparently not being fed in FCID custody. The set of clothes that he was arrested in, or that he was abducted in, on August 5 in Port Harcourt are the same set of clothes that he's still wearing up till now. So as you can imagine, there are, significant, hygiene concerns there. The FCID is not permitting him to do basic, sanitary activities. You can imagine how unpleasant that might be. He also needs healthcare attention, because for the 1 week where he was handcuffed and, circulation to his wrists were cut off, which, by the way, the marks are still very visible, there's a possibility that there's some sort of infection that might have taken hold there. It's impossible to say without him seeing a doctor first. Needless to say, he has not been given any access to any sort of healthcare professional. And over and above all this, it's difficult to say what his state of mind is, because if you are thrown into essentially a dungeon for 6 days without food, without seeing another human being, without knowing whether you're going to make it out, alive, and the only reason your story has even come to the forefront of national consciousness is because your captors try to rope someone else in who happens to then go public with it. And it's impossible to say whether you were actually it's impossible to say whether they actually had any intention of letting you survive this before this became public. So it's difficult to say the impact that this has had on his mental state. And then, as of yesterday, the latest update was, when we tried to send a lawyer to speak to him, the police has apparently restricted all access to him. They're not allowing anyone to speak to him, because clearly they don't want him feeding any more information that can get out into the public about his treatment.
Now, David,
So,
I'm also very concerned about how you're going about this, because you have been responsible for also making some retweets. So I'm wondering how your sense of security is right now, what you feel, or how you're attending to that. But regarding some of the retweets that you've made, you made a retweet from a Jimmy Hulk LP, and I'm going to read that verbatim. This retweet talked about, hang on a second, I think I just lost it.
It's right there on the screen.
It's right there on the screen. Well, there it is. Let me read it from the screen. It says, if you send Pidom Nigeria any classified information via Twitter, DM, and you are in Nigeria, make yourselves invisible ASAP. It goes on to tell that you should change your location, get rid of your SIM, do not use the internet. Now, how credible is this? Well, obviously, you tweeted it. So give us some more context on this and why it was that you felt the need to retweet this information.
well, so the gentleman who tweeted this is someone who's actually personally known to me. I know him quite well, and I know that he happens to have contacts within the Nigeria Immigration Service, amongst other parts of the Nigerian intelligence community. So we actually had a conversation yesterday, and he informed me that based on the information he has been getting out of that and other parts of the intelligence community, prior to when this failed attempt to rope me into this scheme was made, apparently the police and the intelligence community have already trolled through the Twitter account of Pidom, before I got access to it and locked them out. So apparently, the goal of doing that was to try and get hold of his sources, to try and find out who has been feeding him information. Bear in mind that the information that has been leaked by Pidom has been so embarrassing to the government, to the extent that the Secretary General of the Federation, Akume, has, I think as recently as June, came out and reiterated to civil servants that there are consequences under the Official Secrets Act for leaking classified information, because bear in mind, Pidom has leaked documents up to and including the very presidency itself, documents which the government obviously has found very embarrassing. So the primary goal of one of the primary goals of this operation was to find out who these sources are. So according to this fellow's source, there is every indication that in the coming few weeks, there's going to be some sort of witch hunt within the Nigerian Public Service, especially at federal level, to try and get hold of people who have been feeding information to Pidom Nigeria. Because clearly, what this government values is not actually doing its job. What it values is regime security, regime protection, and apparently keeping its information airtight, even if it's information about its gross malfeasance, is a far bigger priority than actually doing its job.
David, I have to ask you about your own. I mean, Mizuno sort of leaned to us there in the beginning, and I have to ask you, right? Giving Pidom's now arrest or abduction from the description of all of this, one has to ask about your own safety and what it means for press freedom and also whistleblowers as well. I mean, to my knowledge, whistleblowing is not even a crime, and the anti-graft agency calls for whistleblowers in the system and actually provides a reward for whistleblowers. Why the sudden change now, and what does it mean for freedom of press and expression and dissent, especially for persons like yourself?
Well, so as I said, the fact that the type of information being put out by Pidom was information that was that far-reaching. Let me give an example of this. So this was shortly after Tinubu took office. So I think this was sometime, I think this might be late last year, early this year. I'm mixing up the timeline. But if you recall, during the UN General Assembly, I think this was last year actually, when the president and his son traveled to New York. And the leak was then made that the budget for this extravaganza, which included several senior members of the government, and which included a very expensive hotel in New York and the services of exotic dancers, quote unquote, that all of this was funded through the excess wheat grain levy account, which was essentially a federal account which was instituted by the Goodluck Jonathan government to hold the proceeds of a levy on imported wheat grain, which was part of the cassava bread promotion policy. So that was a policy that was intended to make Nigeria self-sufficient in flour production by discouraging imports of wheat grain. And instead of using that money for what it was intended for, the president apparently took that money without appropriation and used it to fund a jamboree in New York, a jamboree that, according to reports, included use of cocaine and use of dancers, if you catch where I'm going with this. And the president's son was apparently part of this entourage, even though Sheikh Tinubu has no position in government. Apparently, first son is a thing now. This obviously caused a lot of embarrassment to the president and to the presidency. And this was 100% Pidom's leak. So when you are having a whistleblower operating at that level, which to the best of my knowledge is pretty much unprecedented in Nigeria, especially for an anonymous whistleblower, I would imagine that the government would have considered this to be, putting yourself into the mind of the Nigerian government that sees information as a threat and that sees people having access to information as a threat to regime security. I would assume that the government would have seen this as a top priority, which is why it's not a coincidence that in the same time period where we had 20 medical students getting kidnapped and the government sort of just keeping mum about it until we heard that they were supposedly rescued yesterday, and then one of them came out and said no, they weren't rescued, ransoms were actually paid. We don't know the truth of that matter, we probably never will. But during that same timeline is when all these resources were being dedicated to locate one whistleblower somewhere in Port Harcourt, right? Because bear in mind, this is, if you have 15 armed men going in to arrest one person, the size of the team behind those 15 armed men can be 3 or 4 times that. So you might have 50 people working on this operation. The sheer amount of manpower that would have been dedicated at the National Cybercrime Center, the FCID, and whichever other parts of the intelligence community that was coordinating with this. I've heard that there was involvement from the NSA's office as well. So the sheer amount of manpower that would have been dedicated to this, I think it just really says it all about the level of priority that was assigned to this by the government. So as for where that leaves people like me, well, I mean, you shouldn't really be asking that question because, I mean, I've sat in this seat several times and answered questions that are
Yes,
directly
indeed.
related to things concerning my
Well, yeah,
safety.
well, just
Doesn't look like that's
from
going
a
to
human
change anytime
perspective,
soon.
very concerned for you. Well, let's go back to your press release now. You also implicated the judiciary, talking about the complicity of the Nigerian judiciary in this matter. Could you elaborate on that, please, and the implications as well? And if you can summarize, because we're almost out of time.
Well, so specifically regarding the arrest of apparently more than 2,000 end bad governance protesters nationwide, and the fact that these people, for the most part, are still remanded, the judiciary is highly complicit because, in the first place, if someone is being arrested for an offense that doesn't exist, it's the job of the judiciary to immediately set them free. These people were arrested for protesting. Protesting is a protected right under the Nigerian constitution. Nigerians have freedom of speech, freedom of association. These are inalienable rights under the Nigerian constitution. These are on the first page of the Nigerian constitution. So there is no way that the judiciary should see the Nigerian police force or DSS or whoever hauling people in under all these trumped up charges, but the real underlying charge is that these people are protesting, and the government sees a protest as an attempted regime change operation and as a threat to regime security. So it hauls in protesters to have a chilling effect on other people who may be considering protesting. The judiciary, under no circumstances, should see that and actually agree to remand these people in prison and actually agree to conduct a trial for these people. These people committed no offense. They were out on the street protesting. They have every right to do that. There's nothing wrong with protesting. And if the government doesn't like, or the executive doesn't like that people are protesting, well, tough luck. There's actually supposed to be nothing that the executive can do about it. As long as it's a peaceful protest, which for the most part it was, you cannot arrest people for protesting. Protesting is a right.
David,
So for the judiciary to then be complicit in this, yes, that leaves us in the situation we're in. We have a complicit judiciary.
Okay.
We're going for an ad break very quickly, but before we do, I have to ask you about this because we're really pressed for time. So if you can answer me very briefly, I wouldn't mind. One of his arrest is one of the complexities of his case of this arrest is that he most likely went against the Official Secrets Act by leaking official information of the government to the public, and this is a criminal offense. I have to ask, how would he intend to maneuver that very quickly in less than 30 seconds because we have to go. We're pressed for time.
Well, first of all, it's up to the state to prove its own case. It's up to the state to even prove that this Bristol Isaac person that they arrested is actually Pidom Nigeria. And then after doing that, it's then up to them to prove that he intentionally set out to defame the government by putting out information that he knew was classified. So it's one thing to know this colloquially, it's another thing to prove it in court. So we look forward to that.
All right. Well, David, thank you.